A lot of Anne McCaffrey's Pern books are a little bit hit and miss. This isn't because Anne McCaffrey wasn't a good writer. It's because if you're going to write 30 plus novels set in a single world, some of them are going to be hit and miss. That being said, the one thing about them that remains fantastic is that you have people riding dragons. These dragons are fully domesticated dragons. They have, after all, been genetically altered by their interaction with people. And that is a perfect example of how you can use science or magic to enhance your setting with the domestication of animals that shouldn't otherwise be domesticatable. Welcome to another episode of Just in Time Worlds with your host Marie Mullany. Today I want to talk to you about the domestication of fauna and flora in fantasy and science fiction worlds. It's going to kick off a little bit of a series. I'm going to discuss the broad strokes of domestication today, and then in future videos I will discuss specific genii like insects and animals and sea animals and plants, etc., etc. So I'll do a little bit of a deeper dive into those specific areas. Before we dive into those specific videos, I thought we'd set a baseline for domestication, what it is, and what elements it brings to your fantasy world building. Before we get into the video, please do hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. If you'd like to support the channel, you can support me on Ko-fi or you can buy my book, links down below. And if you do have a Discord account, we have a Discord community, link to that down below as well. Okay, let's get cracking. First, let's talk about domestication of fauna and flora in our world. The book Guns, Germs and Steel by Jared Diamond sets 6 attributes for an animal to be domesticatable. Now, I'm going to cover these rules really fast because I want to get to the magic and the science, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, I will give you the 4 Fs that CCP Gray summarizes this with. The animal must be easily fed. Something like grass or corn or garbage, preferably not a carnivore, because the animal must also be friendly, and if murder is your full-time hobby, it's hard to be friendly. It also needs to be an animal that's not too skittish, because otherwise it is really hard to contain the animal and to capture the animal without injuring it. The animal must be fecund. This has 2 elements to it. 1, it needs to be able to breed rapidly. No pandas allowed. It also needs to be an animal that has a short enough generational span that a human could see a difference in the animal's progression over the course of a human lifespan. That's why elephants, for example, can't specifically be domesticated. Their breeding cycle is so long that a human won't see a difference in the breeding program associated with an elephant. And then the last F is the animal needs to have family values, otherwise known as there needs to be a hierarchy. Generally speaking, when we're dealing with a hierarchical animal, if we tame or dominate the alpha male or alpha female of the group, then we take over that group. Dogs want to be in our packs, horses want to be in our herds, and so on and so forth. That's why a zebra can't be domesticated, because zebras don't respect the family hierarchy. There is one other rule that I want to emphasize about real-world domestication. Animals are more likely to be domesticated if they have 2 products that we use. They could be a meat animal, like a sheep, but a sheep is more likely to be domesticated than a pig is. Why? Because a pig offers very few secondary products. You can't do a lot with pig leather. Their one big secondary product is that they will eat anything. For this reason, pig domestication increases when you have cities, because pigs then provide a secondary product of garbage disposal. It's important to look at the animals in that way. Like a dog provides protection, companionship, help with hunting, and so on. That's a lot of services that a dog offers. But it's not a primary food animal. That's why very few carnivores or omnivores become domesticated, because they don't offer enough benefit for the trouble you have to go through to domesticate them. Okay, so much for domestication of animals in our world. What about straight up domestication in a fantasy world? In our world, you would never see a war bear. You would never see an army charging towards you riding on bears. Why? Well, bears are not good to eat. They are not very friendly. Murder is definitely a side hobby for them. And they're not that family orientated. But in John Gwynne's world, there are giants riding on bears. And they have domesticated these bears. These bears live in stables, and they are the giants' mounts into battle. They have giant war bear mounts. Why could they domesticate bears and we couldn't? Because John Gwynne's bears are different. They were acceptable to domestication for some reason. And you can do that in a fantasy world. If there is some animal that you want to domesticate that exists in our world, but can't be domesticated here, that doesn't mean the same applies to your world. After all, we don't have magic, we don't have wizards, we don't have flying carpets. Really, you're going to draw the line at you can't domesticate a bear? Of course you're not. You're going to accept that in the fantasy world, evolution rolled a different set of dice, and bears in that world are maybe friendlier. Maybe bears in that world have got a family structure that makes them much more open to domestication. Maybe they eat more omnivorously than carnivorously, which makes them easier to feed. So all you have to do in that case is change that animal in some evolutionary viable fashion so that it does meet domestication criteria. As another example, in my world, in the Kisangi continent, I didn't want to have horses, but I wanted to have animal transportation. So I looked at the antelope available in Africa. Now, most of the antelope in Africa cannot be domesticated. The reason is quite simply capturing them without killing them is hard, and then containing them is incredibly hard because they can jump so high. That's actually quite a simple fix. You just reduce the animal's predators and increase their friendliness, and you can have an oryx that is also domesticatable. And that's what I did. So I have oryxes that are domesticatable, and I have various other species of antelope, but instead of riding them, because I didn't make them big enough to be ridden, I have these carriages that they pull at incredible speeds because antelopes are very fast. And that is also how my postal system works in the Kisangi continent. You have these riders with these very small buggy style of chariots that they use to take letters across the length and breadth of the continent. If you want to take that approach, just pick the animal you want to domesticate, figure out what makes it hard to domesticate, and change that trait. If you like learning about the 4 F's and how to use them to make your animals more domesticatable, hit the thumbs up button. And let's move on to using your fantasy world to engineer domestication. So this brings us back to the dragons of Pern. Colonists landed on Pern, and they wanted to found an agrarian colony there. On Pern, they found a natural life form, which they dubbed fire lizards or dragonettes, and these were tiny little dragons that could breathe fire. They had not been on the planet for very long, for just a few years, when a red planet came in through the Oort cloud of their system and dropped a super dangerous life form that they called Thread. Now, Thread ate everything. So the colonists were eaten, their crops were eaten. It looked as though the whole colony was going to be destroyed. The geneticist Kitty Ping then took the dragonettes, which could react to Thread, and destroyed them with their fire-breathing ability. And she genetically altered them, making them big enough to ride and building into them the ability to imprint on the first human that they saw as they hatched out of the shell. And from Kitty Ping's experiments came the first 17 dragons of Pern and their riders. Now, when the first story came out of Pern, it was a long time after Kitty Ping's original experiment, and dragons had naturally evolved further. But their initial domestication was not through the natural process of domestication, but through the engineering of science, and then through the evolution of their experience with man. You can achieve the same thing with magic, obviously. You can magically interfere with an animal to make it domesticatable, or you can magically interfere with an animal to initiate domestication. I do want to say here that domestication and tame are not quite the same thing. Like in my world, I have the giant snakes, the Masuroxi, that you can ride and that the rider establishes a magical bond with. This is not a bond like the dragon riders of Pern that is for life or anything like that. It is a bond that the magician establishes with the Masuroxi once off and then has to maintain as long as they want to keep the snake under control. And once they release that bond, the snake goes back into the wild. These are not tame animals, they're not domesticated animals. And just to sort of illustrate the difference between tame and domesticated. So if you like learning about how you can use science and magic to engineer your domestication, hit the like button. Okay, so what does all of this give you for your fantasy world? Basically, anything. You want to domesticate a lion? That's cool. Think about why lions aren't domesticatable in our world and change it. They don't offer enough product, so maybe your lions do more. Maybe your lions can be used to hunt with. You want to have your elves live in tree cities? Have them domesticate the trees. Have them change the trees so that they become these things that can be naturally guided to build a whole city out of tree life. Have them domesticate vines so that the vines form bridges as you walk across them and drop away behind you, the bridge vanishing as you walk. You can train a vine to do that if it was properly domesticated. Use domesticated bees and have them be attack bees that obey commands. Or have natural magic-using bloodhawks that carry messages for people, as I do in my world. You can achieve all of this as long as you remember what the rules of domestication are and why you're breaking them in your world. It doesn't matter that it's not realistic. All of fantasy is not realistic, but it needs to make sense internal to your world. My oryxes are not as flighty as the oryxes in our world. John Gwynne's bears are not as murderous and not as anti-family values as the bears in our world. And McCaffrey used science to alter the genetics of the dragonettes to create dragons that were domesticatable. As long as you have a good reason that works within the rest of your world, you can domesticate anything you can think of. So remember those 4 F's. Feed, friendly, fecund, and family values, and break the rules as you please. And those are my thoughts on domesticating fauna and flora in fantasy worlds. I hope that you have enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below which genuses you would like me to tackle in terms of animal exploration in future videos. And I will see you soon for another episode of Just in Time Worlds. And don't forget to give the video a thumbs up.